Hi, this is Rebecca from Weft and Willow Fiber Art Studio, and I've been meaning to do this video since the summer. I visited Harrisville Designs, where I was able to talk to Chick, the owner, about this lovely loom that's behind me. This is the Peter Collingwood Rug Loom, and I was able to talk with him about how we designed it with Peter, the different aspects to it that makes rug weaving incredible. And I want to be able to make the shaft switch system, so I asked him questions about that. And I also have apparently a shaft switching system that someone made already from Michael Macroloom, so that'll be a future video. And so it'll be fun to share with you this journey of figuring out how to actually use this and being able to make some rugs on this and being able to share that experience with you. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. We are in Harrisville Designs. Here is Chick, the owner, and he's going to share with us a little bit about his business and where we are right now.
Okay, this is the showroom and retail store for the business. Upstairs is the classroom. It's going in business. It's in operation right now. This is an old woolen mill built in 1832, expanded in 1853. We're standing in the expansion part of it. And we've been in this building for about 15 years.
Okay.
And it's been a great building for what we do with it. Main business is making yarn, and we think of that as the heart of our business, but we also make looms and equipment, and started making floor looms in 1972, started the business in 1971. Everybody was interested in an inexpensive floor loom at that point, and I thought, well, wait a minute, it's like razors and razor blades. We make the razors, we can sell the blades. And so we came up with the idea of selling a loom as a kit. So we made our small looms as kits, and they were immediately successful because it's building a tool, and a weaver doesn't want to be intimidated by their tools. If they put it together themselves, they'll understand exactly how it works.
I love that concept.
And by 1978, we got the idea that we could make more than just the inexpensive entry-level kind of looms, but also make a very good loom. And I came up with the idea of making a small rug loom, and that's where the collaboration with Peter Collingwood came into play.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I've had about 5 of your looms come through my studio that people have had. And since I'm from New Hampshire, I was so excited to find out that you were a New Hampshire-based business.
I think the thing that all looms have good and bad qualities there, and it's sort of what you're looking for. And we've never been pretentious about our looms because we really want, I mean, if there's any message, it's for me, don't buy a table loom. And so trying to get people onto a floor loom as inexpensively as possible. That's what the inspiration was.
Yeah.
With the rug loom, we were trying to do something completely different.
Yeah.
Using the car comparison again, it's like Volkswagen all of a sudden building a racing car to try to prove that they can make anything. And that's why I came up with the idea of the rug loom. I immediately began by reading Peter Collingwood's book, which is the Bible for rug making.
Yeah, right.
And I realized right away that it was hard to appreciate how much the issue of tension plays a role in a rug loom. Because really the only difference between a sweater and a rug is the density of the cloth. So if you put a sweater on the floor and walk on it, you're going to wear holes in it. But if you put a rug on the, well, hopefully it won't wear holes in it. And that's the density. And to build the density of the cloth, you got to have a very heavy beater. And otherwise you're going to use your shoulders to beat it. And when I got realizing what I was up against, I decided I needed professional help. So I wrote a letter to Peter Collingwood, introduced myself. I had met him at a couple of convergences before, but I didn't really know him. He hadn't been here to teach. And I told him my dream was to build a small rug loom. And he wrote back and said the world needed a good small rug loom and he'd be happy to help.
Fantastic.
I didn't realize at the time he had already approached several loom makers about the possibility of incorporating some of his ideas into their looms. And they never responded to him. Possibly because most loom makers are woodworkers and not weavers, but
Okay.
I don't know. It was just dumb luck on my part.
Well, it feels like that was supposed to happen then, right? Where you guys were
Apparently, yeah.
joining forces.
And that
with
was in
these
about
ideas.
1985 we started. And I sent Peter information about our looms, and he wrote me back and said, your looms look great. I've run across them in workshops and they're fine, but they're jack looms, and the rug loom needs to be counterbalanced or countermarched. And he said, I don't really care what kind of action we use. It's just got to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And I said, you really don't care? And he said, no, it doesn't matter to me. And I said, well, I care. I hate counterbalance. We're going to make it countermarch. He said, good, I hate counterbalance too. So I realized then I was up, Peter he's the most intelligent weaver I've ever come across, but he wasn't going to push his ideas on anyone else.
Okay.
He had his ideas, he felt strongly about them, but he thought your ideas were just as valid as his. And so he agreed. We sort of wrote back and forth, talked on the telephone a few times. And I said I wanted to come to his studio to look at his looms. And he said, well, I've modified the looms and I don't know if it's relevant. And I said, well, that's what I want to see. And so my father and I went to England and visited his studio and spent about 4 or 5 days there talking with him and looking at his looms. And on the way home, on the plane, I started thinking, well, he has a number of innovations which are nice. Do we want to make a regular loom and then sell those things as accessories, or do we want to build those into the product? And except for the shaft switching, I decided we would build all his changes into the product.
Great.
Because it was really his loom, part of his design, and that's how it came about. My father did the mechanical things on this loom. Peter told us how it should work. My father figured out how to make it work, and I got to do the woodworking.
Nice.
Which was almost irrelevant, but it was fun. So I got to do it. Peter didn't care what the loom looked like. He didn't care what the wood was, as long as it worked.
Oh, it's beautiful. People, when they see it in my studio, they're like, oh,
Yeah,
look
nice.
at that wood. This is
Well,
gorgeous.
it was the one thing, it was the first loom we ever made where we could be lavish in the materials. We didn't have to cut every corner to keep the cost down.
Yeah.
And I always liked the combination of mahogany and maple together. And so that's where it came from.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
We built the first prototype loom out of pine, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
And it turns out when you talk to an engineer, pine can work for a loom. Most of the third world rug looms are made of pine.
Yeah.
But, for a commercial product, it needed to be hardwood. And that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Shaft switching was fascinating. I didn't know much about it when I started. And, it depends on who you ask. People think people have been weaving for 25,000 years.
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful when you come up with, you think, a bright idea, because it's probably been done before and discarded for some reason you haven't yet figured out. So it's rare that you can come up with something totally new.
Yeah.
However, I do think shaft switching may be one of those things. I don't see any evidence of it anywhere before in weaving. And I think it is pretty much unique.
Yeah, so I think, with Peter Collingwood's book, one of the things I liked he talks about is trying to make your process of weaving as most effective with the least amount of work you have to do with it, right? So like some tapestries, it's like each individual little like warp you have to think about, but with his different techniques, it simplifies different aspects with that.
Peter has what he calls the universal tie-up. Okay. It's a way of tying up a countermarch loom so you can make every single shed. There are 14 sheds you can make with 4 shafts. Okay. And the individual tie-up, the universal tie-up gives you the ability with your feet to make all those sheds. Sometimes you have to use 2 feet.
Okay.
It is almost impossible to work with it, I find, and most people find. And Peter even agreed. However, if you're making samples, you do that tie-up, then you can do every shed you can possibly want. But in production, you're not going to use it.
Okay.
It's irrelevant for the shaft switching. If you're looking at the warp here, and you might see every other end is doubled. So it's considered a single end, but it's doubled. And I asked Peter about that one time. Why do you double the ends? He said, because it makes a better fringe. It's going to get covered by the warp, by the weft anyway.
Oh, I love learning that. It's not necessarily the structure of it. It's
he's very clever and practical. Yeah. So the shaft switching device sits on top of the shafts. This is Peter's third version of the shaft switching device. It's everything from here on up.
Okay.
And it's a platform that has to turn with the shafts, and they don't want to come undone. And these little levers, he called them levers, are hitched with Velcro, so they stick down, and then they don't flop around when you treadle it like this. So you can play it like a piano when you get used to it. What this lever does, this lever controls this cord, and this cord is threaded through a heddle in shaft 1 and a heddle in shaft 4.
Okay.
And the warp end that would go in either one of those passes not through the heddles, but through the cord. So the cord, I don't know if you can see this or not. The cord, so hard. The cord has a mark on it. And that's where the heddle, the warp end, in this case 2 ends, but just it's a single end.
Yeah.
The warp end goes through that cord.
Okay.
So when I move that lever, I can't reach it. That cord, basically what it's saying to the warp end, you're on shaft 4.
Yeah.
And when you go like this, now it says you're on shaft 1.
Okay.
So it's like cutting and tying and rethreading a warp end without actually doing all that stuff.
Okay.
And Peter, he credits shaft switching to a student.
Oh, wow.
She didn't figure out how to do it. Yeah. She just asked the right question. They were doing a block weave class, typical block weave class, and she said to him, Can we move the block? And he said, no, you can't move the block. Once it's threaded, you're dead for the whole warp. Yeah. But he said he spent the next 3 days thinking about that, and he came up with the idea of being able to move the warp ends. And it can go from either shaft 1 to shaft 2 or shaft 1 to shaft 4, as long as they're next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
He did 1 to 4 because this gave him a bigger platform at the top.
Okay.
Are all of these all 1 and 4?
Yes, they're all 1 and 4. I don't know if I can explain this to you or not. All right. If you take the block down to 3 ends, okay, they're only, let me see if I can figure this out.
Yes, I see there's 1, 2, 3.
All right, so in these 3 ends, there's only 2 sheds you can make. You can do 1 up and 2 down, or 2 up and 1 down.
Okay.
If you have 1 up and 2 down, and you throw the weft, that color is going to be predominantly on the face of the cloth.
Okay.
If you have 2 up and 1 down, that color is primarily going to be on the back of the cloth.
Okay.
And if you could change that, I don't know if I can make this work or not. Oh, I had it. Okay. I don't know if you can see these 3 ends. When I move this lever, this end right here is going to go down. Now it's down. Now those 3 ends, I have 2 down and 1 up. Now I have 2 up and 1 down.
Okay.
Okay. So you when you're weaving shafts, you use 2 different colors, color A, color B.
Yeah.
And you always run them in the same order. You always treadle it in the same way.
Okay.
But the only thing you're changing is these levers.
Okay.
And as you change the lever, I mean, this is a straight block weave here, so you're not seeing shaft switching. But over here, you're seeing it move. And the blocks that we had when we originally started, Peter had 3/4 inch blocks. And one of the first looms we sold, a customer said, can you make me 5/8 inch blocks instead of 6/8? And I said, well, yeah, sure, it works. And so I told Peter that. And he said, you can do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, let's switch to 5/8. So right in the middle of our doing it, and he'd already written his book, but hadn't published the Beyond the Basics.
Yeah.
It completely blew the doors off his thinking, because you can do twills and things with the 1/2 inch spacing that you can't do with 3/4.
Yeah.
And so we went from 3/4, we started with 5/8 custom for the customer, and then Peter wanted 1/2 inch, so we ended up with 1/2 inch. We sold 1/2 inch and 3/4 for a long time, but nobody ever bought the 3/4 again, because the 1/2 inch gives you a lot more. The things that he added that are simple, that are so elegant, that have nothing to do with shaft switching. One is this cloth guard right here.
Yeah.
Came from Scandinavian weaving, and you put it on here, and what it's doing is it's protecting your stomach from the cloth.
Okay. Yeah.
But he got the idea, if I raise it up a little bit, then I'm not going to let my shutters fall.
Oh, nice.
So he took a good idea and just made it a little bit better. That was one. Another thing is this dust apron.
Yeah.
This apron right here, you see, if I get it off, it's just a dust apron covering the cloth. It doesn't go anywhere. It's a short apron.
Yeah.
Just hangs over there and hangs on the same bracket as the cloth protector. Peter likes that because he said when he finished a rug, he would have to clean it because the backside of the rug was all covered with fallings out here.
Yeah.
This way, take the dust apron off and shake it and put it back on.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
That's what he was doing. What I like about it is when I'm weaving, I'm not going to do this now, but if you can, well, you can't imagine, but you imagine when you come around, you got these metal rods sticking out.
Yeah.
When I weave, I go around like this, and it goes around the metal rod, and I keep on going. And then 10 minutes later, I realize, oh no, I made a big, and I don't go backwards. So the dust apron's wide enough to cover those rods, so you can't catch it on anything.
Yep, I understand completely with that.
That was a really nice, simple thing, but very nice. The other thing he did, we don't have it as an accessory, he hangs a magnet on the side of his loom, and he throws all his tools against the magnet, which is really a handy thing.
Yeah.
The best feature, he thought, and one of his best ideas after shaft switching, is this warp extender in the back. What works is this tube goes up and down this threaded rod. So when you start a rug, this tube is all the way at the top. And it has a 3.5 foot stroke, which means you can put on a 7 foot rug before you ever have to touch the warp beam again. So the best analogy I can think of is think of a window shade you pull down and then you move it back up. So if I lower this tube down 2 inches, I can roll on forward 4 inches without ever touching the warp beam.
Yeah.
The theory here is no matter how good a warper you are, you might introduce inconsistencies onto the beam.
Yeah.
And when you have this kind of tension in the warp, any inconsistency can drive you crazy. So if you weave without this, what I found is you got a loose end here, a loose end over here. Pretty soon you got weights hanging down and you get all kinds of a mess in the back. This system is almost foolproof because you raise the tube all the way up, you let out enough warp to go all the way to the front, and you tie on each individual end. Yeah. And you can tension it because these tubes are slippery. You can tension it all the way back to the beam. So it doesn't fix your tension, but it maintains your tension.
Okay.
So if you can tie on properly and get good tension to start with, as this comes down, you never introduce new warp.
Okay. Yep.
And it is, Peter's still very cautious the way he winds the warp, and he should be. We're not. I've dropped the beam like this down the stairs and pulled it together and still made it work. It's really fantastic. He came up with this idea because he had a commission to weave a rug that would fit into a recess in a floor. And it had to be even from salvage to salvage within 1/8 of an inch.
Wow.
So it had to be almost perfect.
Wow.
And so he came up with this idea to make it almost a perfect tension and perfect size. And when he did it, he realized he'd solved one of the main problems of rug weaving. Because you've got to figure out how to keep that tension from changing while you're weaving it.
Yeah.
If you're going to weave more than a 7 foot rug, and he's weaving, his rugs were mainly 1 meter by 2 meters. So that was fine for him. And this idea is described on page about 52 in his book.
I like that you know the number.
He said it's early in the book, so people tend to overskip it.
Yep.
But the warp extender went out that way, sideways.
Yeah.
It took up a lot of floor space.
Yeah.
And it wasn't practical for most people's houses. It worked in his studio.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter whether it went out or up. In this case, it went up. And he always liked the way we did this. If it wants to be longer than that, we have built a custom loom with has double stroke. Okay. So you can go 14 feet.
Wow.
But normally, you would just take your chances. It's very hard to do. But you know, no matter how well you warp, you don't want to touch that warp beam during that rug.
Yeah.
So whatever tension you start the rug with, you will finish it with it.
Okay. Amazing.
And then when you finish that rug, you cut the warp.
Okay.
And you move this tube back to the top.
Yeah.
And you retie it again. So you tie on every rug to give it the right tension.
Yeah.
And then it's really a fantastic idea.
And then do you keep these in the whole time too?
The leaf sticks?
Yeah.
No, they shouldn't be.
They're just in there for
they're
the
just
visual.
more than anything.
Yeah.
The counter marsh action doesn't look like counter marsh because we put all the lambs on the same level.
Okay.
So you have your long lambs and your short lambs together.
Yeah.
A lot of counter marsh looms are on two different levels.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference. It's a little better this way.
Okay. Yeah, because I've got a Gomacra standard as well, so I was curious. I hadn't gotten to this point yet.
Yeah.
So.
And then the gates on the treadles are to keep the treadles in place. So you don't have to look at them every time you treadle in.
Yeah.
And we have locking gates as an option too. You can step down on a treadle and move it to the side and it stays down. So if you're doing hand knotting or something like that, you don't want to keep your feet on the treadles, you don't have to. Fast. Yeah. And then you want it longer than 7 feet. So we have a warp release from the front. And the tension's not as important with rag looms. Yeah. So we sell it as an accessory. You can push a little button here, releases the warp, you can roll on without getting up. Here, the weaving width is about, the way you make it big, you push the warp, the beam back. Yeah. And you can do that sitting there. Because you can leverage it with your arm. Okay, then you weave the space, then you got to get up and roll on. So if it's about 6 or 7 inches of weaving space, that means every half hour or so you're going to have to get up and go back because you release the warp extender in the back. Okay. And I said to Peter, that's a little awkward. He said, about every 20 or 30 minutes you want to get up. So yes. And then as you move it, you can, and it's, remember, whatever color you have on the face, it's black on the back. Okay. Because you're always weaving, you're alternating colors. Yeah. It's color A, color B, color A, color B all the time.
Well, it's interesting now realizing it's the 3-step system too, because that also, has limits then those options for you. So that makes sense too.
You can change the colors as you go, of course.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
The twill, when you're doing a shaft switch twill, if you look at Peter's book, it's not color A, color B, color A, color B. It's color A, color A, color B, color. So it doesn't repeat for 12 picks. Okay. And Peter Collingwood was clever enough so he could look at the cloth and know exactly where it was in the sequence. But I'm not. So the twills are real. Smoke came out my ears when I started to do that.
So there's you have weights below?
Yes. When it came to the beater, I said to Peter, what about the beater? He said it needs to weigh, he found, a pound per weaving inch. Okay. 45-inch loom, he wants that beater to weigh 45 pounds. Okay. Yeah. And that's what we gave him. And we did that by having heavy wood and also metal plates on the bottom.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people, they have to add those to their beams.
Right. Otherwise, you're going to work your shoulders. Yeah. The thing Peter kept reminding me was not everybody who buys this loom is necessarily going to weave all rugs. Yeah. Okay. So he said, let's not do anything to this loom that makes it difficult for other kind of weaving. Yeah. And that was an example. He said, you want to make those plates so they're easily removed. So if somebody doesn't want a heavy beater, they don't have to have one.
That's great.
The other thing he said was most counter marsh looms, the cords that raise the shafts go down the middle of the loom. And that's okay if you're using 3 ends, 6 ends to the inch or 8 ends to the inch. There's plenty of room in the warp to accommodate those cords. But if you're doing 20 ends to the inch, the cords are going to get in the way of your warp. So he said, run all the cords off and down the side. Yeah. So that's why we divert those things down to the side.
That makes totally sense. Yeah.
And that's really been good. Although most people, we don't sell the loom with the shaft switching device. Okay. It's sold as an accessory because it could be intimidating. Although almost everybody who buys the loom buys the shaft switching device also.
And for me, I love learning all these things. And so for me, my friend was like, just use it normally first. I'm like, oh, but why not? Just like jump right in.
Yeah, it's really, it's a fantastic. The idea of shaft switching is you can wind a warp for 20 rugs, and every rug can be completely different.
That's amazing.
Because the design is all in the levers.
Yeah. And what do you recommend for the warp for this? Is it?
I think it's 8/2s linen that we use mainly.
8/2 linen. Yeah.
It could be 8/3s. I can't remember now.
Okay. Well,
but it has to be something that doesn't stretch.
Right. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too how he talked about having 6 on the end too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that makes it more reinforced. And
Peter had a great sense of humor. I remember a student said to him, he was explaining the use of a temple, and the student said, "Well, use a temple?" And he said, "I always use a temple. You can't make a rug without one." And because you see, it stretches the reed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she said, "It's kind of cheating, isn't it?" And he said, "You're using a loom, aren't you?" Perfect answer.
Yep. Well, that's good to know too. I've got them in my studio. So
He's a great person that way.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
That's
this has
all right.
been such a lovely interview about
It was fun to do it with him.
Yeah.
And standing on his shoulders got me quite high in the sky. I didn't even know what I was doing. And most of the credit for the loom goes to him, which is great.
So I teach at the college level in the art department, and when we have artist lectures, I like to ask artists, what do they wish they knew when they were younger, when they were first getting into their practice, with the creative journey that they're going on? Is there something that you wish you knew as a young, either maker of equipment or folks who are just getting into weaving or fiber arts?
No, I think things I've learned are people are very creative, and the abilities of a lot of people are phenomenally exciting, and they can do an awful lot if you give them the right tools to do it with.
Yeah.
If I'd known that when I started, I would have been a little more daring in some of the equipment that we did. But otherwise, the same.
I like that concept for sure.
Yeah. People are creative.
Yeah.
Students especially.
Yep. And sometimes they're holding themselves back because they don't know where to start. And taking classes are great. You guys have a lot of workshops and classes.
We do, yeah. We've been doing classes since 1972. I always thought that the future of the craft depended on the quality of the classes.
Yeah.
And I used to run around and teach how to finish hand-woven woolen cloth. And I was astounded at how inefficient some of the classes I visited were. People weren't really learning to weave. They were experiencing weaving, but they didn't really get enough of it. And so we started teaching classes and bringing people in from all over the world, basically, to teach. But we also, about half our classes are for beginning weavers.
Okay.
Which is really where the future is.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I know. I feel so I'm 42, and I feel like as a younger person in the weaving world, it's part of my responsibility to help other young folks get involved too.
And also weaving, it's a lot of work, and none of us are born a weaver, but it still has to be fun, so you want to pursue it.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a balance in running a class between creating a sweatshop or creating fooling. You can't just fool around.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to make it onerous. And you want people to leave after a 30-hour course with some skills and some enthusiasm for pursuing it further.
Yeah.
Because if they don't pursue it further, what are we going to do? Right.
Well, you've done such a lovely job over these years of building this up, and I feel so thankful that you let me come in and talk with you about this.
That's all right.
It's been
Happy
such
to
a
do
treat. All right. Thank you so much.
So stay tuned as I go further into a little bit more about some of my experiences at Harrisville Design and how I'm going to make this work. This loom is missing a few parts, and it definitely does not have the shaft system. So that'll be something I'll be making. And so it'll be fun to carry you through this experience. All right, bye.
You can edit it later, right?
Yeah, I can edit it.